Okay. Enforcing marijuana laws in the U.S. costs us $3.6 billion annually. Yet, though it has failed to reduce the availability and the use of marijuana. I've done a lot of research through different sources and developed the thesis that marijuana criminalization has caused serious issues in this country. These issues include mass incarceration and arrest, and as well as lack of access for medical issues, in addition to the huge amount of money that we pump into this, despite it not affecting anything. The biggest problem with the criminalization of marijuana, it leads to the needless arrest and targets minorities. Despite smoking marijuana at similar rates, African Americans are unfairly arrested and incarcerated at higher rates than whites. According to the ACLU, African Americans are 4 times more likely than white Americans to get arrested for marijuana possession. This is a chart showing the racial disparity for consumption of marijuana throughout the United States. As you can see, overall it is 4 times, which is still staggeringly high, when in some places it can even get as high as 10 times as higher arrest rate, which is just absurd. This disparity is further backed up by the peer-reviewed article from Dr. Lisa Moore from the American Journal of Public Health, concluding that the war on drugs has far more disproportionately affected communities of color rather than white communities. The $3.6 billion put into regulation is wasted, seen as, despite all the money we put in, it has little difference on the consumption and availability, according to the ACLU. The Moore article further backs this up by saying that on a federal and state level, we spend a total of $42 billion annually on the war on drugs. The root of these issues comes from the 1930s, when politicians used it to attack African Americans and Hispanic immigrants. According to History.com, the drug was used for medicinal purposes, and it was smoked by traditional Mexicans. And when there was the Mexican Civil War, they immigrated to the U.S. and brought this tradition with them. With this, Americans used this to target them, used it and they criminalized it, so they can incarcerate them and then deport them. Later on, it was then justified for racism against African Americans, using sensationalist articles that said that it made them violent, as according to Dr. Malik Burnett. Because of racially motivated these laws are, they still influence our lives and cause many of the racial issues and disparities that I touched on earlier. The 30s laws were later replaced under the Nixon administration, where it was put in a categorical system. Marijuana under the system was put in the most restrictive group, along with drugs such as heroin and LSD. This limits it to say that it cannot be used for any medical purposes or even research. Despite Nixon getting a lot of advice, the Nixon administration getting a lot of advice that it should not even be illegal, he still went ahead of it with it for political reasons. Even as state governments try to overturn these laws, the federal government still defends them, despite many of the motivations for these laws being very flimsy or downright racist and malicious. The most logical solution to this is to legalize marijuana for people over the age of 21. This would end the racially motivated arrest rates. We can see this in states such as Washington, where according to the ACLU, once marijuana was legalized, it greatly reduced this racial disparity. One of the other huge positives is the ability for medical marijuana to be used on people such as chemotherapy patients and AIDS patients. The research is very limited or nearly impossible because of how restrictive it is in that top category. And as long as it is still in that category, it's very hard for states that have legalized it to get the funding that they need to properly research it without the federal government. Medical marijuana laws were created to target groups of people rather than actually help make our country better. These racially based laws should in no way justify the wasting of billions of dollars to target a drug that has legitimate medical purposes. Because of these huge issues with these laws, I believe that it is only legitimate that the marijuana laws that restrict it should be completely abolished. If you believe this, I think that you should contact your elected officials and tell them that this is your stance and you will not support them otherwise.